What were you doing at 2:30 a.m. on New Year's Day? Fast asleep? Still partying? Approaching the Panama Canal? That's what Scout was doing. When we first started out cruising, I'd often get the feeling that someone was going to politely tap me on the shoulder and say, "I'm sorry, there's been some kind of mistake. You clearly don't know what you're doing. We simply can't allow you to be in charge of this boat." I don't get that feeling quite as often these days, but going through the canal in pitch black with 2 advisors, 3 line handlers, and my family aboard, and dozens of people involved on the canal authority side, I definitely felt like the tap on the shoulder was going to come at any minute. And maybe it should have. Or maybe the Scout crew is up to the challenge of transiting the Panama Canal in one day. Come find out.
Since well before we purchased Scout, crossing the Panama Canal was something we'd dreamed of. If we could make it to the canal, well, the world would be our oyster, and the Pacific, our next playground. What do you think? Like 5 in the morning, we're in our second lock, heading through the Panama Canal on New Year's Day. Pretty good way to start the year, I think. My hands are gonna be all torn up by the end of the day. These ropes aren't for the faint of heart. On New Year's Eve 2023, we got the call. Scout would be transiting that night. Lines and fenders were delivered, and at 2 a.m., tired and a little nervous, we set out to start the next chapter of our family's sailing adventure.
The Panama Canal was completed in 1914 by the United States. Desires for a more direct passageway from the Atlantic to the Pacific go back centuries. After all, Christopher Columbus was looking for an easier way to get from Europe to Asia, and the Americas got in his way. The first meaningful effort to cut a canal through Central America was by the French in the 1880s. While it was a French-led and largely French-capitalized effort, the undertaking was actually a private enterprise, even though $287 million, an astonishing $9 billion in today's dollars, was spent, which is the most expensive non-war related project in history up to that point. The company ultimately ran out of money and went bankrupt. While there are many reasons the French venture failed, including the horrible loss of life from tropical diseases such as malaria and yellow fever, estimated at over 20,000 people, the biggest reason was that they attempted to build the canal at sea level. In the end, the company sold their interest, equipment, buildings, and a railroad, and work to date to the United States for $40 million, about 15 cents on a dollar of what they spent. $40 million might not seem like a lot in today's dollars, but the US paid Russia $7.5 million for Alaska and France $15 million for the Louisiana Purchase.
The completion of the canal was an incredible achievement in history and made the lives of seafaring folk like us much easier. But actually going through is more than a little intimidating. Up until this point, we could have sailed back to Florida at any moment. Now, if we want to sail back, we have to go the long way around. And I'll be honest, I was really nervous. My home and my family would literally be locked in tight quarters with a giant cruise ship. Churning water, steep walls, and guys throwing heavy metal balls onto our boat. What if something went wrong? It turned out I didn't need to worry. The canal is a well-oiled machine, and we had the help of a fantastic advisor named Ricardo and his trainee, Carlos, who were calm and organized and gave us clear instructions along the way. We also had picked up 3 experienced line handlers at the Shelter Bay Marina, a fellow cruiser and his 2 grown sons, so there was never a feeling of danger or forces out of control, thank goodness. Though the kids may have preferred a bit more action. There was a lot of standing around in the hot sun and waiting. That's a big old boat.
I'd always thought that going through both sides of the canal in one day involved maintaining an 8 or 9 knot speed over the lake, faster than Scout can motor. But it turns out that it all depends on when you're scheduled to go through the up and down locks. We were first through in the morning, which left us a leisurely motor across Lake Gatun. So leisurely that the ship we were sharing the locks with put down an anchor for a few hours. Speaking of the lake, it was made specifically for the Panama Canal and at the time was the largest artificial body of water in the world. Greatly simplified, the canal is a large earthen dam, an artificial lake 85 feet above sea level, 3 locks to get up to the lake, a 9-mile long cut, and 3 locks to get back down to sea level. When the United States wanted to build the canal, the region of Panama was the state of Colombia. So the United States needed to negotiate a treaty for the rights to build the canal, as the treaty the French company had did not transfer. Colombia was not happy with what the US was willing to pay. After months of unfruitful back and forth, it just so happened that there was a bloodless revolution in Panama which declared independence. Panama was lightly garrisoned by Colombian troops at the time, and the US quickly recognized the new nation and moved in with the Navy to prevent Colombian troops from landing and reclaiming the territory. A treaty that was more advantageous for the US than had been offered to Colombia was then quickly ratified with Panama. At the time, the United States was criticized for its tactics, but ultimately, it worked out well for almost all parties involved. The US got the rights to the canal, the world got the benefits of cheaper commerce, and Panama now controls the canal, which comprises up to 20% of the national economy when you include indirect revenue. Only Colombia was the loser. The American effort to build the canal ultimately came in under budget and ahead of schedule. Main reasons for the success were the decision to build a canal with locks, advances in technology over the decades, but perhaps most of all, it was the focus on infrastructure. Most critically, the elimination of mosquitoes. In the 1880s, it was thought that diseases such as malaria and yellow fever came from foul soil, whereas in the early 1900s, the medical community was realizing they were carried by specific species of mosquitoes. The United States put forth a massive effort to rid the canal zone, as well as Colón and Panama City, of the disease-carrying mosquitoes, with tremendous success. I'd like to say that when transiting the canal, one can get a sense of the struggle, of what it was like to hack through and dig through untamed jungle, of all the souls buried beneath the water of the man-made lake. But it's hard to. The canal today runs so smoothly at such high volume. It was handling around 1,000 ships a year when it opened versus closer to 15,000 today. And the sides are so well tended that it feels as if it might have always been there. I'd also like to say that the time and convenience benefits are easy to appreciate. But with the canal over 100 years old, they really aren't. And this is coming from someone who is just at the bottom tip of South America on the Strait of Magellan. We transited in a day. It would have taken us 6 uncomfortable months to go the long way around. But the canal is a fact of life. Such a game changer that it's almost impossible to imagine it not being there. In the end, that's probably as high praise as there can be for an advancement. It's really hard to even imagine what things were like before it existed.
We were required to have 6 able-bodied crew members on board. The advisors coordinate and communicate with the canal staff, the container ships, and then relay the information back to the captain. And then that leaves the line handlers. All boats, big or small, are attached to lines as they go through the locks. Our job is to keep the boat stationary in the center of the lock while the water is rising and lowering. To do this, we had big lines attached to the 4 corners of the boat, 1 line handler for each line, and there are 4 canal workers on the walls of the locks, 1 for each of the lines of the boat. They carry smaller lines with weighted balls called monkey fists on the ends, which they throw to us. We attach their lines to ours, secure them to huge cleats on the canal walls, and we keep them taut to keep Scout in her place.
They're opening. Yeah.
When the gates open, the wall handlers release our lines, and we pull to get them back on board as fast as possible. And off we go. This process happens 6 times. 3 on the Caribbean side and 3 on the Pacific side. And then we're done. Almost. "15 hours after setting out in the morning, we find ourselves waiting for a couple of water taxis to come collect our crew and the borrowed gear, fenders and lines. And that's Stanley, by the way, our agent, who arranged everything for us. Feels great to be out of the marina, dropping the hook for the first time in the Pacific, and at the precipice of a great journey.